Design. What is it good for, right? Now, if you want that question answered, if you're someone who is new to design, or you're a hobbyist, or maybe you don't even consider yourself a creative at all, this episode's for you. We're going to continue in our series on things for dummies, right? Because I'm a simpleton. I like things matter of fact, straight to the point. And so I'm going to try to do that with design. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then you're going to want to stay right here. So as I've started to go through this transition, and you know, my last day was a couple of days ago at MX, and as I've done that, I've had to reflect. I've had to work with people in making that handoff. I'm going to continue to provide support, on a contract basis for as long as they need me. But I've had folks reach out to me and say, you've helped us with this, different stakeholders in the organization. For example, one person reached out about, PowerPoints, presentations, Google Slides is what we're using these days. And they wondered if, hey, can we sit down with you virtually for 30 minutes and you just kind of give us an overview of what makes good design? How can we take these slides and make them look good? Because you were able to help us out with that. And I thought, sure, there's some things I can teach them. Let's do it. And as I got into it, I realized that there's a lot to this. And we went for an hour and barely scratched the surface. And so it's caused me to kind of reflect on what is it that makes good design? What is it that helps the user want to look at something, right? For lack of better wordology. Yeah, that's a new one. Because as humans, we are inundated with design these days, with ads, good design, poor design, everything in between. We may not even realize that what's being presented has been designed. But we're all experts, because we see so much of it, at knowing, or having that innate sense to think, this is professional or it's not. We may not have the vocabulary or even be able to point out what is it about this web page or PowerPoint presentation that makes it feel sophisticated or on brand. And today I want to try to, at a high level, point out some of those things. And perhaps it'll help you. And there's a good chance that you may disagree, or you may feel that I missed something, that I've forgotten to call something out. If that's the case, call me on it. Please put it in the comments. Shoot me a instant message on one of the social outlets, whatever. I'd love to know. And on the flip side, if you're like, hey, this was helpful, can we dive a little deeper into this part of it? You know what? I'm game. I do this on the weekly. I'm going to keep doing it. So you might as well help me help you, right? So where do we start? Now, there's a lot that goes into design. I think there are things that we might just be born with, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those things can't be learned with practice. For example, some people, at a young age, they're just able to pull the right crayons together and color something and the colors are harmonious and it looks better than someone else's, right? Or we all know those people who are always looking amazing. They know how to put that little outfit ensemble together day after day. Things match or they don't, but you know it's intentional. That, my friends, is design. Now, you might say, I thought this was more graphic design related. What are we talking about fashion for example? Well, stay with me here. I would argue that it's all the same. You know, sure, there are nuances within fashion design, interior design, UX design, print design, digital web design, whatever. Yeah, there are those nuances, there are those things that are key to that application. But in the end, design is design. And what, you know, and I could look up the exact definition of what design is, but you're going to get the Ike version, the winging it, you know, little nug just come hot off the grill or popped right on out of the knowledge frying pan. So what design is communication in the end. If the design doesn't communicate the intended message, then it's failed. Now, if that intended message is chaos and confusion, then, you know, maybe you can haphazardly get there. But most of the time, there's key thing or a couple of things that you're trying to communicate or you're trying to guide the user to do, essentially, right? So let's say it's a web page and you're selling your services or a product. Well, you want that user to be captivated enough to make their way through the page and think, okay, yeah, I like what I'm seeing here. I'm getting the information, and whoa, look at that. There's the buy now button or schedule a demo or whatever it is, which is your call to action, the main reason that this page exists, because design is primarily used as, you know, transactionally. Yeah, I'm really pulling out all the stops with my faux vocabulary today. You're welcome. No, it's, you know, it's a transaction. It's like you're looking to give something and get something back, or get the user to do something. And so it needs to be communicated. Even if it's not what we think of as a traditional transaction, like the example of the web page. Maybe it's a traffic sign, and we need users to know that you've got to avoid this pothole up ahead, or this is the exit you want to take, or this is a one-way street, don't go that way. You know, it's communication, and those things need to be communicated very quickly. And so sticking with that kind of transportation, you know, real world environmental advertising, essentially, you know, look at it from the perspective of the user. And most of the time, they're going to be in a vehicle moving at least 30 miles per hour. So and you're supposed to keep your eyes on the road. You can kind of glance at the signs. And so that's why most of the signs, they're just a symbol. You know, might be a picture of a simple person walking, and we know that, oh, there must be a crosswalk. Or there's an arrow pointing in a certain direction. Or there's a color that communicates to us bad, red, or good, green, right? And the same goes for billboards. You know, a lot of times people are, you know, business owners, clients, They're thinking, hey, I'm paying 10,000 plus a month for this billboard. I need to get my money's worth out of it, right? So, okay, we need to put our mission statement on there. We need to put our URL, and so we can track it. We got a slash billboard or something. We've got to put all of our best product images up there. Next thing you know, we've got 30 words up there. Now, you might say, as a designer, that's busy, that's too many words. And the client is like, I wanted to say what I wanted to say. And most of the times, it's stop and go traffic, and people have time to read my 30 word billboard. That may be true, but because you're breaking kind of this unspoken rule of 7 words max on a billboard, that includes your URL, then the user, the driver of the vehicle, or the passenger, whoever's looking, will just innately know there's something wrong with that billboard. Doesn't play by the rules. Doesn't feel as sophisticated as these other ones. A mile down the road, we just passed a Coca-Cola billboard, and guess what? There was no URL. There was no paragraph of text saying that Coca-Cola is so tasty and delicious and you must get one now. No, it's just the logo, the word, the script, Coca-Cola, and maybe a red background, or maybe an image of happy people in the background, and that is it. Now, Coca-Cola obviously can get away with being super minimal because they're like the first or second most recognizable brand in the world. Touche, I get that, but doesn't mean that we can't start emulating the big guys, Apple, Coca-Cola, whoever, and get some of that same leverage for our own brand. Because I would argue that it creates even more interest if the user sees something and doesn't have all the information and they have to hunt for it a little bit. It's like, oh, what was that thing I just passed? I saw this word or logo for the company. Next time I pass it, I'm going to ask someone else in the car, or maybe I'll take a picture of it, or have my passenger take a picture, and we'll do a little research or whatever. In most cases you're going to want to at least put a URL, but you don't have to put http://www. It can just be mx.com, for example. And then let that be the call to action, and it's super clear that you just want that user to remember mx.com, for example, and then they may go there just to find out what is this place, what's it all about. So now there's obviously more to it, and you don't want to just run out and start paying $10,000 on a billboard for your company just because you heard about it here on the pod. There are nuances, but the point I'm trying to get across here is that communication in design is key above all else. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about layout and things like white space or negative space, imagery versus copy or text. Now, if you want something to feel more sophisticated or calming or comfortable, something that a user will be drawn to, you want to go with minimalism, less is more type of thing, right? Because if you go to a page, whether it be a web page, a Google slide, a billboard, and if you see the images, or well, maybe images isn't the right term because it could flood the whole background, but let's say text or logo, and it's crammed up into one corner, it's really tight to the edge. There's very little spacing between the logo, the edges of the page, and this body text or copy. Then you're just going to fill that as the user, the viewer, for lack of a better term. I've got a big lack of terms, as you'll continue to find out. It just feels gross. You look at something and you're just like, yeah, that's busy, that's too much. And sometimes that may be the goal. You want to convey that, hey, there's so much going on here. We tried to fit it all in and we're barely scratching the surface, and more is more. That, in rare cases, may be the objective. For example, with a pitch deck for funding. Now, I haven't gone and done these pitches myself, but in talking to others who have, for big companies, MX is what I'm thinking of particularly, I learned while working on the pitch deck, that you didn't want it to feel overly designed or have it feel like there's a marketing angle to it, like you're trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes, because these are sophisticated investors. They just want the details. A lot of times you'll send out a teaser deck first just to see what kind of interest there is, and then companies that say, yeah, I'd like to learn more, you send them that 10-12 slide teaser deck, and then follow that up with an in-person meeting, and you go through the 40-50 slide deck with all the details and the blown up graphs and stuff. But that in this case, it was actually what they wanted to communicate, that got multiple little charts on one page. It's more plain. I mean, things are lined up and clean, so they have a little bit of sophistication, but there's nothing like big, beautiful splash page images that show anything from kind of a marketing spin or advertising spin. So that would be a reason to do more. But like I said, it's very far and few between. The number one thing that I hear from clients, stakeholders, CEOs is make it look like Apple. I want this to feel like Apple. And why not? The best brand, the biggest company, the largest market share. Now, they're kind of going back and forth with Microsoft of all companies right now, believe it or not. But you get the gist. And Microsoft has actually upped their design game considerably in the past 20 years, even 10. So that's what they all want, right? They say make it look like Apple. But at the same time, they give you the content, or let's use the slide deck as an example. Here's 10 slides, and there's 1,000 words on each slide. You have to go down to a 7-point font just to get it to barely fit. And they say, yeah, I want it to look like Apple. Well, show me where Apple does this. You look at one of their presentations, which they broadcast widely, their keynotes for the new Apple phone or the new Apple phone, the new iPhone, the new Apple Vision Pro, the watch, whatever. And most slides are single image or minimal text, and then maybe there will be a slide about all the features that'll have the most text, but it's still designed in a very nice way, and it's doing kind of what I mentioned the pitch deck wants to convey. Essentially, like, look, there's all these features, and you can see that it must be technical and therefore valuable, so give us your money, right? But essentially what's happening there with Apple is they're using a lot of white space. They're letting their beautiful images speak for themselves, because what have we heard all of our lives, right? An image is worth 1,000 words. So you take all those 1,000 words that you wanted to put on that slide and put it in an image. Take the time to create an image that really communicates. Now, this is also true with thumbnails for your videos on YouTube. You look at one of the biggest YouTubers of all time, Mr. Beast, and it's rare to even have text in his thumbnails nowadays. But he spends like $100,000 of resources to create each thumbnail. And the teams he's working with, I'm sure, are producing multiple, they're having multiple photo shoots to get his face in all different positions and expressions, and sometimes they need to do a custom thing. It's kind of this hyper real polish that's put on these images. It's framed in just a way that gets the clicks. And it's the same thing with Apple. It's the same thing with the best brands. Is how can you get more from less? So white space, super important. So when I was talking to these individuals about their PowerPoint presentations in at MX through this transitionary phase, that was my biggest thing. Is I'm like, with as much content, you've got these huge tables, all these paragraphs of text before and after these tables, and you want it to be beautifully designed. Well, there's a give and take. If you need all of this information and you can't come up with a way to tighten that up quite a bit, then just know that it's not going to be the best design slide. Doesn't matter what you do. I went through and showed some different ways to style a table. How can we make sure that the freaking default bullet points that they throw on all this crazy spacing, padding, margin, and that just makes your tables that much wider and taller. How you can change those things to tighten it up, make certain font or blocks of text a smaller font size and others bigger. And then that all again points back to communication and hierarchy. So we're from the Western Hemisphere. We're here in the United States of America. We read from top to bottom, left to right. Okay, so you've got to realize that even though this isn't a page in a novel, that's still how the user is going to consume your design. So if you've got something that needs to grab that user's attention, you're not going to put it at the bottom. You're going to put it at the top. Boom, here's your big headline or hero image that basically tells this user, this is why you want to keep going. This is why you want to keep scrolling. You want to take your eyes and keep moving them down the page. And then there's other little visual cues. You know, it might be the way the white space flows down the page in a serpentine way to guide the user's eye. Or there may be little graphic elements that, you know, little boxes that are cascading down, or arrows. Or it may be just as they scroll below that first title, they get enough of an image that makes them want to see the whole thing, so they keep scrolling. It may be font size, you know. I'm going to skim and read these, you know, title size fonts, the H1s on a web page, or H2s because you only want one H1, and get a general feel of like, is this communicating what I want? Am I at the right place? Do I need to go back to the Google search and look at somebody else? You know, so you want to communicate. Now, I know I'm going fast and I'm talking in a way that may not be as elementary as I originally planned or hoped, and I apologize. But you know what you can do to help yourself if you've gotten off track and you need to just calm the heck down? You can go ahead and pick yourself up one of these. Silver can of Diet Coke. Oh yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh yeah. Where were we? So, white space, hierarchy, hugely important. Now, one of the first things I learned when I became a real designer, working at my, you know, the first graphic design studio, after failing at my first attempt at starting my own studio, because it turns out you need to know what you're doing to a certain degree. So yeah, that first thing I learned was basically the grid, the design, and you can look into the fundamentals of design and see what the grid is, but essentially the way it was explained to me, the way that it's made the most sense, is just, you know, make things line up. Okay, so if you've got your logo in the top left corner and there's, you know, 40 pixels of space between the edge of the logo and the edge of the design, and then 40 pixels of space from the top edge to the top of the page, you've established kind of a margin for your design. So use that same spacing at the bottom, where, you know, you might put your copyright in the bottom right hand corner. You know, give it that same 40 pixels of spacing or margin, and all of a sudden it feels a little more professional because it is lined up to some degree. There are rules that are being followed at the top of the design and the bottom of the design and everywhere in between. So now that you've established that, you know, let's just use the left hand side of the page as your 40 pixel, you know, margin. Well, when you create your next section, have that start at that same spot. Wow, who would have thunk, right? Things are lining up. And then as you nest in, or you go into the like nested design, so let's say you have your overall page, and inside of that there's a element or a module that is a box, and it has its own image and some text and maybe a link. You know, think about what is the padding within that box. Probably not going to be 40 pixels, because then maybe you'll have too much padding. So maybe it's 20 pixels, and that feels good. So now every time you have a similar element or module, give it that same 20 pixels. Or let's say the image in that little element is, you know, 250 pixels by 250 pixels. Now the bottom edge of that image should line up with the bottom of your, call to action button or your URL within that same module or element. Try that, and it's going to line up and it's going to feel clean. Now, once you know the rules, you can break the rules, right? Or you can add more complexity. Like, let's imagine instead of just this button being that same distance away from the edges, we have an imaginary box around it that is lined up, and in the middle of that space is your button. Now, if things are lined up correctly and it truly is in the middle, it's still going to feel balanced. So just kind of quick ideas. So white space, lining things up, all key. Remember that the most important part is communication. And copywriters out there hate me when I say, nobody wants to read. They just want to scan the page and get a feel for are we in the right place or not. With as much things that are being thrown at me, do I want to stay here and learn more? Now, there is that person, and this is the goal, that after they've done that initial scan, they've decided like, okay, yeah, I'm in the right place. I don't need to go back to my search. This is where I want to be. Let's dig in. Well, do what the user wants to do, essentially. Like, give them what they want, right? So because you made your initial page so clean and organized and easy to comprehend, then that's where these drill down, whatever. This ability to drill into the website, for example, or flip the page to the next page of the brochure, or look at the table of contents and know this is the section I want to go to in this book, whatever it is that you're designing. That is how they're going to get more information. That's how they're going to digest or scratch that itch for more information. So yeah, at that point, they want to read. They won't, it doesn't mean that you can forget about all these rules on the subsequent page of your website, for example. Excuse me. But rather, you've hooked your prospect, the user, just that little bit more. So just like in fishing, when they're on, you can reel them in. You've got more control over them, right? And so therefore you can guide them through the information you want them to see. Apple is amazing at this. When they have new products, they have these great videos that act as a commercial, but also give you good information on what the features are. Even as you're scrolling through the page, there's animations and things happening that you can't just do a quick scroll through. You have to kind of experience it. But they do it in a way where it's entertaining, delightful enough to where you do it. You do it. You may not read it all, but you're experiencing and part of you is consuming what's being presented. All right. So already this should equip you with a lot of what you need to start designing. And there is more. There's a lot more. I'm going to touch on a couple more things, but just want to take a pause for a second and think, like, let's recap. Let's think, what have we learned, and how can we apply this? So whether you're a designer or not, you're facing a blank page, or maybe you're starting with a template or whatever, just think about first, what am I trying to communicate? Okay. And how can I communicate the most efficiently and effectively? So let's distill it down to the least amount of text as possible. Okay, check. And then let's make sure our images really speak for themselves and have those 1,000+ words embedded in them. Not because you can actually see words, but because they're that impactful. That would be ideal. This can lead to another trap, though, where you're like, oh, great, I'll just create this diagram that explains everything I do, and it'll be super complex, and it's still an image, right? Yes and no, but still, how can we make that diagram as simple, relatable, consumable as possible? Okay, so communication. And then it's all about, you know, sophistication and hierarchy, white space. You know, so again, remember how the user is going to consume the design from top to bottom. Where do you want their eyes to go? So if the first thing they see is the title, and then down a little lower, there's this other visually heavy thing like an image or, you know, another block of bold text or whatever, you know, that's how the eye's gonna go. And you can do a little trick to help kind of understand what you're seeing first, essentially. And so that would be close your eyes to the point where you can just barely see through your eyelashes and it's blurry. You can't read anything. It's just blurry. And then look at your design from a distance and ask yourself, what is grabbing my attention here? What stands out first? What do I see first? And there's your answer. So if it's at the top of the page, then good. What's the next thing? If it's lower on the page, okay, good. Your eyes go in the right direction. And make changes as needed to reach the desired goal. For example, you might have your call to action 2/3 of the way down the page, but then there's other stuff below it. If the call to action is the ultimate thing that you want most users to land on and click and proceed forward with, then by all means, that should grab the most attention, even though there's more stuff below it. That stuff below it should be a little less attention grabbing, and it may be something to help reinforce a person's decision to scroll back up, or even better, hit the secondary call to action lower down. Or they're looking for something that a smaller percentage of people are going to be looking for. Let's say I'm going to a website as a designer and I'm looking for their brand guidelines, or, you know, their media pack, you know, they have a logo that they want people to use or something like that. You know, approved imagery. Sometimes they'll put that in the footer navigation. So I'm scrolling down to that because I know that that's where I might be. But I'm not who they're building the web page for. They're building it for their customer that's going to pay them those dollar bills, which is why we're all here. Right? Well, I hope that's not the only reason. I hope that you get value out of what you're doing as a creator. That is important to me, and it should be to you. So there's a kind of recap of what we talked about so far. Now, to round this thing out, we can go a little further, okay? Let's talk about color a little bit. So, again, looking at that company that all of the clients and stakeholders refer to, that they want to look like, Apple, what is their color palette? Well, if you really look at it, I mean, initially, in their initial rise to popularity, it was this rainbow colored Apple logo, okay? well, that's not necessarily the case anymore. Now it's more white, blacks, and grays is essentially their color palette. Super sophisticated. You look at the majority of their devices, they're clean, and that's why they use those colors, because they convey class and high end and minimalism and sophistication and you know, more sophisticated palette, whatever. But then they get all their color from their content, their beautiful lifestyle images of people using their products and having a good time, or even though it's a black and white iPhone or essentially just grayscale tones, they've got different colored lights that bring in color, kind of like this video feed I've got going right now. Not that this is Apple quality. But this hat of mine that's black and white, if you look at it, you can see blues and reds and oranges in that hat. You go to Apple's App Store and the individual thumbnails or images for the various apps or categories are very colorful, and it works because the brand, the Apple color palette, is very, what's the term? Yeah, this is tough. Why can't I think of the most simple term? Neutral. Very neutral. That was scary. Apologies. So therefore, these colorful things just work. So if your website, if your design is about the content and content is coming from all over the place, then consider a more neutral color palette. That's why most websites are either a white background or a black background, or maybe a subtle shade of gray. Now, on the flip side, if you have distinct colors for your brand, you've got to be a little bit more careful with the photography or the imagery that you're going to use with those colors. Now, and again, these rules can be broken once you learn them. But for example, let's go back to diagrams and presentations. Now let's say we have a pie chart or a bar chart, and there's 8 different variables or things that we're looking at or comparing to each other. Now traditionally you just get that auto-generated pie chart from Excel or whatever. It's going to be a random mess of those 8 colors. You're going to have a red and a yellow and a green and a purple and whatever. And yeah, it communicates, but it's not sophisticated. It looks like something that was auto-generated out of a tool. Okay, so how can we make it look more sophisticated? Well, pick a very limited color palette, maybe 2 colors, maybe 3, and then use different shades of those colors. So let's say we had a navy blue, a kind of brighter sky blue, and a lighter baby blue, whatever. And maybe some of those are, but 3 different colors of blue. So that's 3. But let's say we did 50% of each of those colors. So now we have 6 colors that can be used. And if you use that in your chart, it's going to look more sophisticated and still communicate to the user. Another thing you can do is use patterns in your design. So you may stick with one color, or the absence of color, black, right? Say we've used black. Well, you can have a solid black. You can have a black with just horizontal black lines that are spaced a certain amount to where it's almost like shading. And so you got your blackest black, your next black with horizontal, and then you can stick with horizontal lines and just give it more space in between each of those lines, and then it'll look less and less of a weight or gradient. It's kind of like cross hatching or halftones. So that would be my initial thoughts on color or values, is use neutrals, especially if you're going to have a lot of colorful imagery, or just stick with as minimal or as limited a color palette as possible. Now, if you're uncomfortable coming up with these colors yourself, well, guess what? You can pull those colors, and this is something you see on those HGTV design shows all the time. Somebody's like been brought into the house and they're looking around and they're like, okay, so you want this redesigned. Oh, and what's this painting over here on the wall? Oh yeah, that was a painting my grandfather purchased back in 1952, and we just love it. We had it appraised recently on the road show, and it appraised for $50,000. So we want it to be a centerpiece. And then the designer's like, oh great, it's a nod to your grandpa. You want it in this room still. What colors can we pull from that painting? There you go. There's your color palette. And this doesn't just apply to interior design. It could be for web design or print design. You might have a piece that you are particularly inspired by. You found it on Pinterest or ArtStation, and now we don't want to copy the design or steal anything, but you're inspired by that color palette and you're using it in a totally different way. Well, take that color palette, use it, and then that those colors work well together because someone else created a successful design with that. So color. And finally, now there's a lot more to this, right? But it's time for a Diet Coke break. Oh baby. Yeah, that's good. Just typography, fonts. So how do you know which font to choose, right? And maybe you just have the limited fonts that come with the operating system. Now, the nice thing about like the Adobe suite or Figma is they come with their own fonts these days, and I think Figma's primarily comes from the Google font library, which is free. Search Google fonts on Google and you'll find what you need there. So those are some areas to look into. Okay. Now, additionally, there are free fonts. Now, some of those aren't the best. Okay. And so be careful. You can go and pay for fonts, right? You can look up what are trendy fonts right now. But will that trendy font that works in this makeup ad for preteens, is that going to work for your corporate technology company website? Maybe. Probably not. So make sure your font communicates, again, communication is key, what you want it to communicate. So if you are a sophisticated tech company or a bank and you want to convey permanence and longevity and safety, then you're going to go with a more traditional Helvetica font or Adobe Garamond, something that is lasting and timeless. And you're only going to use 2 or 3 fonts, and maybe it's the same font, but just you're using 2 or 3 font weights, like you're using Proxima Nova Bold, Proxima Nova Light, and Proxima Nova Extra Bold, or something for certain things. That is going to be more sophisticated and orderly than if you're just randomly picking 20 different fonts for your little word cloud that you want to put in your kitchen as a cutesy little decor thing that looks very amateurish. But if that's what you're going for, then you go for that. So there you go. There's just a taste of what it takes to do design and how you can improve your designs, whether you're, like I said in the beginning, someone who doesn't consider themselves a designer or creative, or you're someone who has been in the game for a little while and you've been faking it till you make it, and this helps you just make it a little bit more. And again, just another disclaimer popped onto this thing that, yeah, I'm just one dude. Okay, so there's gonna be others out there that have other ways, better ways, not as good ways. Just take it as it is. But this has worked for me. And like they would always say at the end of an 80s G.I. Joe cartoon, knowing is half the battle, right? So maybe you know a little bit more. But until next time, my friends, just keep on creating. Create or die.